My Victorian mansion on Birchwood Lane had once been filled with echoes of laughter, of footsteps of life. Now it sat like a museum, and I was the exhibit no one came to see anymore. A 79-year-old widow in a house built for five. Some days the silence presses down on me so hard I feel like the wallpaper might peel, just to scream. It was a Sunday funny how time still clings to its rituals, even when the world forgets you. I sat by the window in the living room, just like I always did. The late afternoon sun stretched long golden arms across the parquet floor, dancing toward the base of the old grandfather clock. That clock, it used to chime on the hour like a heartbeat for the house. Roland, my husband, had restored it himself when we first moved in nearly 5 decades ago. "It'll outlive us both," he'd said, wiping dust from its brass pendulum. I remember laughing and telling him not to jinx it, but maybe he was right. Maybe it was time itself that had stopped, just not in the way we thought. I watched the second hand tick, 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 and then it didn't. It simply stopped. The pendulum froze mid-swing. 3:12 p.m. That was the time everything stood still. The silence that followed wasn't the usual kind. It felt thick, almost sentient. I stood up from my chair, slowly, carefully gripping the armrest with the shaky determination of old bones. My knees whined the kind of ache you learn to live with, but never quite befriend. I took a single step toward the clock, and that's when it hit. A pain not sharp, but deep, curling around my chest like fingers made of iron. It wasn't the first time I'd felt something strange, but this was different. I gripped my rib cage as though I could hold my heart in place with sheer will. The sunlight flickered through the lace curtain and landed across the wedding photo on the mantel. Roland young and full of certainty in his white doctor's coat, and me beside him, smiling in that way only newlyweds do, without fear, without history. It's been 10 years since he passed. 10 years since I watched the last real light leave this house. A heart attack on a business trip in Boston. Sudden. Unfair. He was older than me by nearly a decade, but always looked stronger, more alive. He drank water, jogged every morning, did crossword puzzles in ink. And still, just like that, he was gone. I remember how the house sounded different after the funeral. The floors creaked with hesitation, like even they weren't sure what came next. I reached the clock and touched its side. Cold, still. I felt my breath grow shorter, just slightly, enough to notice. I leaned into the wall for support, the ache in my chest still lingering like a memory that won't let go. I waited, hoped it would pass. Eventually it did, or maybe I just grew used to it. In the distance, a car passed outside, then quiet again. I made my way back to my chair, tracing the edges of the furniture with my fingers like braille. Every item in this room has its story, and I suppose I'm the only one left who knows them. I looked at the photo again. My eyes landed on Roland's hand, resting gently on our son Graham's shoulder. Graham had just turned 7 in that photo. Next to him, Rosalie clung to my arm, her hair in pigtails. That day felt like the start of something. It never occurred to me it might also be the peak. The clock remained frozen. I closed my eyes and counted the seconds in my head, trying to will time forward. But all I could feel was the strange hush of the house, as if it too had been holding its breath for far too long. I didn't call anyone. There was no one to call, really. Graham lived in the city, only 20 minutes away, but his visits had become more ceremonial than sincere. 15 minutes here, a birthday bouquet there, and Rosalie, well, she lived 3 states over and preferred texting to talking. I don't blame them, not anymore. Still, I thought Graham might call. It was Sunday after all. He always called on Sundays, didn't he? I looked at the phone on the table beside me. No missed calls, no notifications, just the blinking green light of a device with nothing to say. Outside the window, the sun had shifted. The shadows were longer now, climbing up the floral wallpaper like ivy. The kind Roland hated, but let me keep because he said it made me smile. The clock still read 3:12, and suddenly I wondered, was it my heart that stopped first or the clock? The ache had mostly faded by then, but something in me knew. Something had begun, or ended, or maybe both. I sat there for another hour, maybe 2. No one called. No one came. The day slid quietly toward evening, and I stayed where I was listening to the silence, feeling it press against me like an old coat I could no longer take off. The clock didn't move, but I would. Tomorrow, maybe. The next morning I woke up before the sun the way I often do now. Not because of any alarm, but because of the silence, the kind of silence that only grows in a house that's forgotten how to breathe. I shuffled into the kitchen and made myself tea. The tea kettle hissed like it had something to say, but thought better of it. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through my chest, hoping it might reach whatever part of me had clenched up the day before. The clock still read 3:12. I should have called someone to fix it, but I didn't. I wasn't ready. That clock wasn't just a machine, it was memory ritual, a part of the house as much as the floorboards, or the faint smell of lavender from the old linen closet upstairs. Fixing it felt like rushing grief before it had finished speaking. And besides, Graham might come by today. He usually did on Sundays, or at least he used to. There was a time when Sundays were sacred in this house. Not because of religion, but because of rhythm. The morning started with the smell of coffee and bacon. Roland would read the paper while I made pancakes. Graham and Rosalie would tumble downstairs, still in pajamas, complaining about syrup ratios or whose turn it was to feed the dog. It was chaos, beautiful, messy chaos. By noon, we'd be in the dining room. Roland always carved the roast, his hands steady surgeon-like, even after he'd retired. Graham would brag about some school project. Rosalie would roll her eyes and launch into a dramatic tale of middle school politics. And I'd sit back and watch the three people I loved most take up space in a world that felt entirely ours. That was decades ago. Now the dining table seats one. After I finished my tea, I walked into the living room. I always leave the blinds open just a bit, just enough light to soften the morning. Dust floated in shafts of sun like tiny dancers, weightless and unnoticed. I sat in my usual chair and glanced at the phone on the table beside me. Nothing. No call. I told myself maybe Graham was busy. Maybe he'd call later. Maybe his wife forgot it was Sunday again. Maybe the twins had soccer. Maybe. But when the clock on the wall in the kitchen chimed once, marking 9 a.m., I knew better. He always called before breakfast, even if it was just a rushed, "Hey Mom, you good? Great, love you, bye." That had become the pattern, a ghost of connection. But even ghosts keep their routines. The phone sat still, and my hands, with their paper-thin skin and blue veins, folded tightly in my lap. I hated how it made me feel, this waiting. Like I was a puppy on a porch, hoping to hear footsteps that never came. I used to be proud. I was Clarisse Whitmore, the woman who hosted medical fundraisers in flowing gowns, who raised 2 children, supported a husband's career, and kept a house full of life. But lately, I felt like wallpaper, still there, still holding everything together, but slowly peeling ignored. I stood up and walked to the mantel. The family photo still sat there. Graham was 6, Rosalie 4. Roland stood behind them, hand on Graham's shoulder. My own arms were around Rosalie's waist, holding her close. I touched the glass over Roland's face. "You'd be disappointed, wouldn't you?" I wasn't sure if I was talking about the children or myself. Maybe both. Graham had always been charming, good with words, good with people. But Roland worried. "He's too used to getting his way," he'd say, folding the paper and setting it down with a sigh. "He thinks the world will always forgive him because he smiles when he lies." I used to hush him. "Don't be so hard on him. He's just a boy. He'll grow up." But what happens when boys grow into men who never learn to come back home? Who forget who paid for their first car? Who ironed their shirts for job interviews? Who stayed up when they were sick, whispering stories at midnight? The phone remained silent. I reached for the bottle of pills on the side table and stared at it. Pink for blood pressure, blue for cholesterol, yellow for God knows what. I didn't know what they all did anymore, only that they kept me here where the clock didn't tick, where the sun didn't call, where the roast was never carved, and the Sunday table was an empty echo. The sun had crept higher now, lighting up the carpet with its faded roses. I used to hate that pattern, so old-fashioned, but now it was the only thing that hadn't left. Just then I heard a sound. My heart lifted. I looked to the phone. but it wasn't ringing. It was the mail slot thwack. A letter. I rose slowly and shuffled to the door. Bill's ads and one envelope with Rosalie's handwriting. She never called, but she wrote sometimes. I opened it, scanning quickly. Mom, hope you're doing well. Sorry we can't visit this month. Jeremy's new job has us swamped. The kids are doing great in school. I'll call next week. Love you always. I smiled, a small tired smile. At least she remembered. She wasn't like Graham. She didn't promise what she wouldn't do. But I still felt the distance like a pane of glass between us, clear but uncrossable. I placed the letter gently on the table and sat again by the window. The clock still read 3:12. A bird landed on the fence outside a cardinal. Bright red like a whisper from another life. Roland used to say cardinals meant someone you loved was watching over you. I closed my eyes. Maybe next Sunday, I whispered. But something inside me was beginning to shift. I didn't know it yet, not fully, but the ache wasn't just in my chest anymore. It was in my spirit. And I was starting to wonder, what would happen if I stopped waiting? The next morning, I found myself drawn to the library. It wasn't a place I visited often anymore. The shelves were tall and dark, filled with books we once loved. Roland's medical journals, thick with dog-eared pages. My own modest collection of poetry, most of it unread for years. The room still carried a faint scent of tobacco and old paper, and something in that mix made the air feel like memory. I hadn't meant to go in. I was looking for distraction, something to rearrange or dust. But when I stepped across the threshold, I felt a kind of pull, like the house itself was nudging me somewhere. There was a particular book I hadn't touched in decades. The Collected Letters of William Osler. Roland had gifted it to me the year he made partner at the clinic. Every doctor needs a philosopher, he said as he handed it to me with that sheepish pride only men in love managed to carry. I reached up to the shelf where it lived. It was heavier than I remembered. As I pulled it down, something slipped from between its pages and fluttered to the floor. An envelope, yellowed with time sealed in wax. Roland's handwriting stared back at me, firm, steady, unmistakable. To Clarisse, if you ever need to remember who he really is. My fingers trembled slightly. I sat down in the high-backed armchair beneath the window and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper dated 16 years ago, long before his death, long before I was ready to hear what it said. Dearest Clarisse, if you are reading this, then perhaps something I feared has come to pass. You've always had a soft spot for Graham, too soft, I sometimes worried. I want you to know I love him too deeply. But I've watched his choices with growing concern. He's not a bad person, not yet, but he's reckless with your love, and that scares me. If ever he asks you for more than you're ready to give, if he begins to treat your generosity like obligation, I hope you'll remember that boundaries are not cruelty, they are love in armor. I trust your judgment more than anyone. But if your heart ever wavers, let this remind you your worth is not measured by how much you can be drained. Yours always, Roland. I sat frozen, the letter limp in my hands. 16 years. How long had it sat there waiting? I read it again and again. Each word rang clearer, more painful, more loving. I could hear his voice in it, the calm firmness he used with patience, the gentleness reserved only for me. How much had I given Graham? Time, money, trust, forgiveness, excuses, too many chances. Too many times brushing off red flags as just stress or a phase. I remembered the first time he asked me for money. He was 22, fresh out of college, or rather fresh out of dropping out. He had a dream, a plan, a passion project. Just a small investment, Mum. I'll pay you back in 3 months. He didn't. Neither did he for the second request, or the third. I told myself he was finding himself, that he just needed a little more support, that if I helped enough, loved enough, he'd find his way. But now I wasn't sure if I'd been helping him or harming us both. I folded the letter and placed it on my lap. The clock in the hallway struck once, just a chime, not the hour, still working. Unlike the one in the living room, I could hear the tick from here, steady and quiet like a reminder. I stood and opened the curtains wide. The sunlight flooded in sharp and golden. Dust rose from the floor like glitter in the air. I watched it, remembering a line from one of the poems in the books on the lower shelf. What the light reveals, the heart must carry. I wasn't ready to call Graham. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the hallway closet, found the small lockbox Roland used for financial documents, and retrieved the file labeled Will C. Whitmore. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, felt its weight. It felt heavier than it should have, like consequence, like change. The doorbell rang. I jumped, slightly startled. Rarely did anyone ring the bell these days. It was Lena, my part-time housekeeper. She smiled, arms full of grocery bags. "Sorry I'm late, Miss Clarisse. The market was a mess this morning." I took a deep breath, trying to shake the fog Roland's letter had pulled over me. "No, it's fine. You're right on time," I said, stepping aside to let her in. As Lena moved through the kitchen, chatting lightly about the price of apples and the new bakery that had opened downtown, I watched her. She was in her late 40s with laugh lines deep around her eyes and a permanent kindness in her voice. She always asked how I slept, always noticed if the tea canister was running low. I'd never told her how much I appreciated that, how rare it was now to feel seen. When she left an hour later, the house fell quiet again. But something was different now. I didn't put the will away. I set it on the desk in Roland's old office and stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow I would call Theodore Garland, our old family notary. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was finally beginning to understand what Roland had known all along. That love without boundaries turns into burden. That silence wasn't grace, and that my time, what little I had left, deserved to be mine. The grandfather clock in the living room remained frozen at 3:12, but inside me, something had started to move. Sunday came again. I woke up early as always and sat in my usual spot by the living room window. The light was soft this time, filtered by thick winter clouds that dulled the gold from the curtains and painted the room in shades of grey. I could smell rain in the air, and somewhere deep in my chest, something heavy began to stir again. The clock still read 3:12. It had become a quiet sentinel, holding time hostage, bearing witness to the truth I'd been trying not to face for years. I told myself I'd get it fixed eventually, but secretly I liked having a visible reminder that something had broken and I hadn't rushed to fix it. I glanced at the mantel. The family photo stood proudly untouched, Roland's steady hand on Graham's shoulder, Rosalie clutching my dress like I was her whole world. I sometimes wonder if she still remembers what I smelled like when I held her. That strange motherly mix of lavender clean linen and butter from the oven. At 9:00 a.m., I brewed coffee and placed 2 cups on the dining table out of habit. One for me, one for Graham. I had even baked shortbread cookies the night before his favourite. I hadn't baked anything in over a year, but I'd pulled out the old tin of flour and the recipe card, with his sticky fingerprints still smudged on the corner. That boy used to lick the dough off the spoon when he thought I wasn't looking. This Sunday he had promised to stop by. "Mom, I swear, just a quick visit, coffee, and a hug," he'd texted on Thursday. "Got something for you too." I read that text at least 5 times since he sent it. Rehearsed how I'd welcome him, what I'd say, whether or not I'd mention the letter I found from Roland, whether I'd hint that I'd spoken to Theodore. At 10:00, I set the cookies out on the good china. At 11:30, I reheated the coffee. At noon, I poured it down the sink and made fresh. At 100, the doorbell rang. My heart fluttered, but it was only a delivery man. He smiled politely and handed me a florist box. White ribbon. Card taped to the top. I brought it inside and set it on the coffee table. My fingers were stiff as I pulled the ribbon loose. Inside, a bouquet of white lilies and pale blue hydrangeas. Beautiful, cold, impersonal. The card read, "Sorry, Mum." The twins' recital ran long. "Hope you enjoy these. Love, Graham." No explanation, no apology, no voice. I stood there for a long time holding the card. Then I set it on the table beside the unopened cookies. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I'd curled my hair that morning, put on my pearl earrings, a soft shade of rose lipstick. I looked presentable, prepared, like someone who mattered, and yet I'd been replaced again by a box of flowers. I walked back into the living room and sat beside the untouched tea tray. The lilies stared at me like quiet witnesses. I picked up the cookies, walked to the kitchen, and tossed them into the trash bin. The sound they made, soft crumbling, somehow felt like an insult. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened Roland's desk drawer and pulled out the thick folder labeled Graham, accounts. It was all there. Every check I'd written to him over the years. For the boutique, for the restaurant, for the yoga studio he opened and closed in under 6 months. The down payment on his first house, his divorce lawyer, his second wedding, line after line of generosity. There was even a post-it note in Roland's handwriting. This is not helping him. It's erasing you. I sat back in the creaky desk chair and stared at that note. My hand moved toward the phone almost on its own. I scrolled to Graham's contact. The words mobile. Favorite stared back at me. I hovered over call. I didn't press it. Instead, I pressed the back button. Then I clicked on Theodore's number. His voice answered on the third ring. Clarisse, he said, surprised. I was just about to call you. Did you have a chance to look over the documents? I did, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I'm ready. Can you come tomorrow? A pause. Then yes, of course. Morning. Early is best, before I change my mind. He chuckled softly, not unkindly. You won't. I hung up and placed the phone face down on the table. The lilies were already starting to droop. I stood and walked to the window. Outside the sky was turning to ash. It might rain soon. In the distance, I saw Lena's car pull into her driveway. She waved. I waved back. She always came by on Sundays, even though it wasn't in her contract. Just checking in, she'd say dropping off soup, or news about her niece Layla, the nurse at the hospital. I suddenly thought of Layla, young, full of fire, always speaking kindly, but never condescendingly. Tomorrow, I'd make sure to include her in the will. Maybe not a large sum, but something. A symbol. The wind picked up outside, and I could see the neighbors' trees sway, shedding brittle leaves that danced across the sidewalk. The clock still read 3:12, and for the first time, I didn't feel frozen with it. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. Monday arrived draped in grey, the kind of morning where even the sun didn't bother to rise all the way. I sat at the breakfast table alone, as always a thin slice of toast going cold beside my tea. I had no appetite. The kettle hissed, then quieted. The house settled again into its familiar hush. I reached for the pill organizer, 7 compartments for 7 days, each one a small reminder of everything that had kept me alive longer than I expected. Morning, noon, evening, color-coded like some sad little candy store. I had memorized the sequence, of course, but this time I just stared at the tiny doors. I didn't open them. I didn't feel like swallowing survival today. I picked up Monday's compartment, turned it over in my hand, and let the pills spill across the table. They scattered, one bounced onto the floor. I didn't reach for it. I watched it roll under the cabinet, gone from view, like so much else in my life. The phone didn't ring. The silence didn't surprise me anymore. But today it didn't settle like a blanket. It pressed down tight and airless. I rose from the chair, my joints complaining with every step, and walked toward the living room. The clock still stuck at 3:12 greeted me like an old scar. I thought about winding it maybe for the sake of motion alone, but I didn't. Let it stay broken a little longer. Let it match the hour I stopped pretending. The ache in my chest returned dull but insistent. I sank into the chair by the window and closed my eyes. Was this it? Was this what the final years looked like? A pill routine, cold toast and flower deliveries wrapped in guilt. I must have dozed off because the next thing I heard was a soft knock at the back door. Not the front. Only one person used the kitchen door. Lena. I shuffled up, blinking the fog of sleep away, and opened it. There she stood damp from the mist outside her arms, full of a canvas grocery bag and a Tupperware of soup. I know it's not my day, she said, stepping inside, but I had extra lentils and I figured. Her words stopped as she looked at my face. You all right, Miss Clarisse? I nodded, but it wasn't convincing. She looked at the pills scattered on the table and frowned. Did you forget to take your meds? I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes, I just forgot. But the truth hung in the air between us, obvious and too heavy to pretend past. I didn't forget, I said softly. I just didn't feel like it. Lena set the soup down, her eyes sharper now. You dizzy short of breath. I nodded slowly. It's been happening more often, especially since Graham stopped coming, and since I started remembering too much. Lena pulled out her phone. I'm calling Dr. Canner. No, I said quickly, reaching for her wrist. Not yet. Just sit with me for a minute. She hesitated, then nodded, leading me to the chair. She pulled another one close and sat across from me. I spoke to Theodore, I said after a long pause. Lena blinked. The notary. I nodded. I'm changing my will. She said nothing, just waited. I found a letter, I continued. From Roland. He was worried about Graham even before he died. Said he saw the way I was being used. And he was right. Lena leaned forward. So what will you do? I'm leaving most of the estate in a trust. The house, the investments, the land, it will only go to those who earn it. Year by year. Not by blood, but by behavior. She gave a low whistle. That'll ruffle some feathers. I hope it does, I replied. They've been too comfortable assuming I'll die quietly and leave them everything. But I won't. I'm not a cash out. I'm a person. Lena nodded slowly. Do you want me to stay the night? You don't look well. I'll be all right. I'm expecting someone soon. She smiled, stood, and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. You're braver than most. Let me know if anything changes. When she left, I picked up the fallen pill from under the cabinet and dropped it into the trash. That's when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way to the front door. Through the glass, I could see a young woman in scrubs, late 20s maybe. Auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, tired eyes that still held something soft. When I opened the door, she smiled. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes, I'm Layla, Lena's niece. I'm a nurse over at the regional hospital. Aunt Lena asked me to stop by and check on you. I stepped back, letting her in. She moved easily, gently, like someone used to navigating fragile spaces. I don't need a nurse, I said a little too sharply. She didn't flinch. I'm not here as a nurse. I'm here because someone who loves you is worried. That's all. That disarmed me more than anything. She sat across from me and noticed the pillbox still scattered. I used to sort those for my mother, she said quietly. Before she passed. Something in her tone made me pause. You've been through this before. She nodded. She was stubborn too. Hated asking for help. Said she didn't want to be a burden. But she wasn't. She was the reason I became a nurse. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a small crack in the ice around my chest. Would you like some tea? I asked. She smiled. I'd love some. As I stood to put the kettle on, something small and strange happened. I caught myself humming. A song I hadn't sung since the kids were little. Something from a music box Rosalie used to keep by her bedside. It was a flicker of light, small, but real. The kind that starts something new. It's strange how quickly someone can go from stranger to sanctuary. Layla came back the next day. She didn't call, first just showed up with a smile, a warm casserole in a Tupperware, and a gentle knock on the back door, like she already belonged. I made too much, she said with a wink. She stayed through lunch. We talked about nothing and everything. About the cats at the hospital that seem to know when a patient is dying. About how nurses tell time not by the hour, but by the medications due. About her mother, who like me had been stubborn and proud, and who also, like me, had learned too late that independence and isolation are not the same thing. Layla didn't pity me. She didn't treat me like a case file or a ticking clock. She listened without trying to fix me. That afternoon we sat in the sunroom. It was cold outside, but the sunlight pouring through the glass was strong, golden, alive. I hadn't opened those curtains in months. Now I couldn't imagine why I'd kept them closed. I used to spend hours here, I told her. Roland would read in that chair and I'd knit or pretend to. We'd listen to jazz on the radio. He always said sunlight was better than any pill. Layla looked around, soaking it all in. He sounds like he was a good man. He was, I said softly, steady, smart, sometimes too serious but never unkind. And Graham, she asked carefully, not as a challenge, just curiosity. I paused. The air shifted slightly. Graham was my heartbeat, I said. From the moment I held him, I thought this is what I was made for. He had these eyes that could charm the truth out of anyone. Even as a child, he could lie with a smile so sweet you'd thank him for the betrayal. Layla didn't interrupt. She just waited. I excused everything. I continued. I told myself he was young, finding his way. I covered his debts, his failures, his temper. I told Roland not to worry, that he just needed time. I gave him all of mine, every last bit. I turned to face her, but he never grew up. He just got older. And now he sends flowers instead of showing up. He doesn't call unless he needs something. And even then, it's not to talk, it's to collect. Layla leaned forward. That's not your fault. I know I said, but that doesn't make it hurt less. We sat in silence, watching the dust drift through the sunlight like flecks of memory. Then she asked, "What are you going to do about it?" I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were green, bright, clear, full of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not the naive kind, the earned kind, the kind forged from grief and years of watching people at their best and worst. I've already started, I said quietly. I told her about the letter from Roland, about Theodore, about the changes to my will, the trust, the conditions, the choice to reward not blood but behavior. She didn't gasp or flinch. She simply nodded like she understood more than most people twice her age. Good, she said. You deserve to be honored, not harvested. I smiled at that, a sad smile but real. Later, she walked me through my medications, organized them again, double-checked the dosages. We wrote out a new schedule together, larger, font color-coded labels. She added a sticky note that said, "Take these for you, not for them. Layla." That night, I took my pills without dread. I even fixed myself a proper dinner roasted chicken and steamed carrots from a freezer bag I'd been ignoring for weeks. Before bed, I sat in my chair by the window and looked at the clock. Still 3:12. I picked up my tea, stared at the mantel and whispered, "It's time, Roland. Time to stop being the woman who waited. Time to become the woman who decided." I went upstairs and pulled out the dress I hadn't worn since Roland's funeral, a dark emerald wrap with pearl buttons down the side. I laid it on the bed, pressed it smooth with my hands. Tomorrow, I would go to Theodore's office. And the next time Graham called, if he ever did, I would have something new to say. No more gentle deflections, no more quietly giving in. Layla had called it honoring. Maybe that's what I was finally doing. Not punishing him, not even protecting myself. Just honoring the part of me that had been forgotten in this house of echoes. The part that still believed love didn't mean surrender. That night, I dreamed of a field of cardinals, red wings against blue sky, and somewhere in the distance a clock ticking again. I didn't expect Graham to show up the next morning. He rarely visited without prompting. But perhaps the universe had a flair for irony. I was still in the kitchen tidying up after breakfast when I saw his car pull into the driveway through the frosted window. Sleek black, polished like a mirror, too big for practicality, too loud for humility. He rang the bell like a man who owned the house. I didn't rush. I walked slowly to the front door, letting him wait a little, just enough to feel what I feel most days: forgotten. When I opened the door, he stepped forward with arms wide. "Mom," he beamed, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned slightly, let him kiss the air. "You didn't call," I said, not coldly, but not kindly either. "I wanted to surprise you," he said too cheerfully. "I was in the neighborhood. The same excuse every time." I stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. "There's coffee, if you want it." He walked into the living room, pausing as he always did to scan the shelves, the decor, taking inventory of what would someday be his. Or so he thought. He noticed the clock immediately. "Still broken?" he asked, tapping the side of it like he was inspecting property. "Yes," I replied, "but I've grown used to the stillness." He gave a nervous chuckle. "You and your metaphors." We sat, coffee between us. I offered no cookies this time. So I said, cutting through the pleasantries, "Why are you really here, Graham?" He looked surprised, then hurt, then offended. But only for a second. Then came the salesman's smile. "I've got a new project. Big one this time. Game changer." "Of course." A boutique hotel, he began, in the foothills near Wind River. Eco-conscious, high-end, think Woodstone, spa retreats, high-caliber investors, already circling. "We're almost done with renovations, but we've hit a snag." I nodded slowly, a snag. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I need a short-term infusion, just $1.2 million to finish the final construction phase. But the return, Mum, we're talking 6 to 8 times that within the first year. You'll get it all back. And then some." He slid a mock-up across the coffee table, images of cabins, misty mountains, yoga decks. I didn't touch it. $1.2 million, I said softly. "That's more than I gave you for the real estate venture, more than the bakery, more than the app. But this is different," he insisted. "This one is real. Odette and I have already put in our own money. I'm not just asking for a handout. Odette, his second wife, the one with designer coats and frostbitten manners. I reached for my teacup and sipped, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. He fidgeted, adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat. "Mom," he said more softly, "I know I haven't always come through, but I've learned a lot. I've changed." I set my cup down. "Then you'll understand when I say no." He blinked. "What?" "I won't be investing," I said simply. "Not this time." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a man suddenly out of oxygen. "You're serious?" I nodded, "Very." "But why you've always—" "Yes," I interrupted. "I have. I've always said yes, even when I shouldn't have, even when it hurt. But I'm not that woman anymore." He stood abruptly, pushed his hand through his hair. "You don't trust me," he said bitterly. "No," I said, "and the tragedy is I'm finally at peace with that." He laughed once. A short, stunned sound. "So what now? You cut me out, pretend I'm not your son." I would never pretend that, I said, my voice steady. "You are my son. You always will be. But being my son doesn't entitle you to my savings, my house, or my peace." He looked toward the fireplace, jaw tightening. "Odette said this would happen." I almost smiled. I'm sure she did. He walked to the window and stared out at the garden hands in his pockets. "What do you plan to do with everything? Then leave it to the nurse?" I didn't answer. "Not yet." "I'll be honest, Mom," he said, turning to face me. "This feels like betrayal." "Then perhaps now you understand how I've felt for years." We stood there, mother and son, on either side of a quiet war. Only this time I wasn't surrendering. He picked up his coat. "I guess I should go." I walked him to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "You're letting strangers replace your family." I looked him in the eyes. "No, Graham. I'm letting integrity replace entitlement." He opened the door. Cold wind rushed in, and with it, a strange feeling swept through me. Not sadness, not guilt, relief. As the door closed behind him, I turned back toward the silent clock. Still 3:12, still unmoving. But I wasn't. I picked up the phone. "Theodore," I said when he answered. "It's time." Theodore Garland arrived the next morning, just as the first light began to push through the clouds early as promised. He was exactly as I remembered, tall, precise, and dressed in one of those well-tailored suits that whisper authority without trying too hard. He looked like he belonged in a courthouse, not my aging foyer. "I hope I'm not too early," he said with a polite smile. "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "I've been up for hours." The truth was I hadn't really slept. Sleep had become difficult lately, not because of age, but because of clarity. Because once you begin to see things for what they are, your mind refuses to let them slip back into shadow. It demands action. It whispers, now or never. We settled in the study, the same room where Roland once wrote every check, read every prospectus, reviewed every trust. I had opened the curtains this morning. Let the light in, no more hiding. Theodore placed a leather folder on the table and opened it with care. "I brought the latest draft of the changes we discussed," he said. "Would you like me to read through it?" I shook my head gently. "I've already read it twice. I want to go straight to the signature." Still, he hesitated. "Clarisse, forgive me, but I need to ask again. Are you completely sure?" "Yes. This is a significant restructuring. You're converting your will into a dynamic trust granting discretion based on behavior, not inheritance rights. That's rare and likely to cause controversy." I met his gaze without flinching. "Good." Theodore allowed himself the smallest smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He pulled out a pen. "Then let's begin." As he explained the structure aloud for the record, I felt the weight of every word settle into place. The house, the land, the bulk of the investments placed into a living trust under my control until my death. The trustees, Theodore, myself, and a third person to be named later, someone impartial fair. The clause income from the estate would be distributed annually, based not on familial ties, but on proven care presence and intention. The evaluation. Each year I would assess the people in my life and issue written guidance for the trust distributions. No one was guaranteed anything. No one was locked out either. The beneficiaries, Graham and Rosalie, yes, but not automatically. My grandchildren. Layla. and possibly others if life surprised me. Money doesn't show love, I said softly as he turned the pages, but it sure can expose the lack of it. He handed me the pen. I signed, each page deliberate, unshaking. 2 nurses had come from the local clinic as neutral witnesses. Lena had helped arrange it. One of them, a woman named Carmen, stood beside the fireplace, her eyes quietly scanning the room. The other, a young man with warm brown eyes, nodded respectfully as he watched me sign. They added their signatures. Theodore affixed his seal. And just like that, the future changed. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. It's strange, I said. I thought I'd feel angry, or afraid. But all I feel is, still. Still is good, he said. Still means clarity. We sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, almost gently, "You know he'll contest this." "Of course he will," I said, "but he won't win." "I agree. Especially with your doctor's statements about your full mental capacity. And with the text messages you showed me. They speak volumes." I nodded. He was never very good at covering his tracks, only at shifting blame. Theodore packed the documents into his briefcase, then paused. "You're leaving a space open for a third trustee. Any thoughts on who that might be?" I looked out the window. Across the garden, Layla was stepping out of her car, waving as she approached. "I might," I said. "Let's see how this year goes." Theodore followed my gaze and smiled. "She seems good," he said. "She is," I replied. "She reminds me of who I used to be before I spent so many years being diminished." He rose and offered his hand. "You're not diminished anymore, Clarisse. You're reclaiming." I took his hand strong and warm. "Thank you, Theodore, for everything." "I'm just the pen and paper," he said. "You're the decision." After he left, I watched Layla walk toward the back door, arms full of something wrapped in foil scones, maybe. She always brought more than she took. I met her in the kitchen. "They smell amazing," I said as she set the pan down. She smiled. "Cinnamon and honey. You deserve something warm." I poured us tea and we sat together in the sunroom. The broken clock was still there behind us, silent as ever. But I no longer needed it to move. Time was flowing again, just in a direction of my choosing. Layla looked at me curiously over her cup. "You look different today, like something heavy got lifted." I smiled. "I signed something. Something important." "Oh," she asked. "I'll tell you one day. But for now, just know this, I've decided not to be someone who waits to be valued." She nodded slowly, a quiet understanding in her eyes. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The air felt clean new. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next disappointment. I was preparing for the next chapter. It came the next evening, like so many betrayals do, not in a storm, not with shouts, but with the soft buzz of a phone screen lighting up beside my tea. Graham's name. I hadn't expected a thank you. Not for the tea, the visit, or even for the years of unconditional giving. But I also hadn't expected what I saw when I opened the message. He hadn't meant to send it to me. That much was clear. It was meant for Odette. "She's slipping. We need to push now. If she dies with that trust still in place, we get nothing. Find someone to pressure Garland. Or fake a doctor's note. Something." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The air in the room thickened. My chest didn't hurt like during the heart episodes. It wasn't physical this time. This pain was quieter, deeper. A sickness that didn't live in the body, but in the soul. I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't a mistake, not an intention, just in delivery. A misfired text, yes, but a perfectly aligned revelation. He hadn't come to rebuild trust. He'd come to calculate his advantage. And I was no longer an obstacle to be gently manipulated. I was a barrier to be removed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone or call Theodore in a fury. Instead, I stood up, walked into the living room, and turned on the lamp beside the grandfather clock. Its hand still pointed to 3:12, as if frozen in permanent witness to everything I once ignored. I sat down with a pen and a yellow legal pad, wrote the date, then, to be filed with the trust in the event of legal challenge by Graham Whitmore. I copied the message verbatim, added context, noted my mental state, the timing, the pattern of previous behavior. Then I printed the screen. Lena had a little printer in the pantry, bought it last year, when she started helping with some of my bills online. I'd barely touched it. Tonight, I used it with shaking fingers, but a steady purpose. When the page came out, I signed the bottom. Then I called Theodore. "I'm so sorry to bother you late," I said. "You're not bothering me, Clarisse. There's something you need to pick up tomorrow. It's insurance. His voice was tight with concern. What happened? I received a message not meant for me, and it confirmed everything I already knew. He didn't ask further. He knew me well enough now. Leave it in an envelope on your porch. I'll swing by in the morning. I thanked him, hung up, and sat back down in the dim glow of the room. Outside, the wind had picked up. A few dry leaves scratched across the porch. Autumn was slipping toward winter. The year was turning, and I could feel something in me turning too. Layla stopped by not long after. She wasn't supposed to. Her shift had ended hours ago. But she arrived holding a basket of muffins and a tired smile. I had this feeling, she said, shrugging off her coat. I didn't speak at first, just gestured for her to sit. Then I showed her the message. She read it in silence. Her jaw tightened, her hands clenched slightly. He wrote this to his wife. I nodded. She looked up. Clarisse, this is criminal. This is contemptuous. I know, I said, but it's also clarifying. Layla leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. Are you okay? I am, I said truthfully, because this time I saw it clearly. I didn't excuse it. I didn't rationalize it away. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. People like him, she said, they count on your silence, your softness. They don't expect you to fight back. Not anymore, I whispered. I'm not fighting out of bitterness. I'm protecting something sacred. What's that? My peace. We sipped tea in the quiet that followed. Later that night, I walked upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were photo albums, ones I hadn't looked through in years. I turned the pages slowly. Graham at 5, at 10, at 20. Rosalie in her school uniforms holding my hand. Roland smiling beneath the summer sun, wearing the same straw hat every year until it fell apart. Memories, all of them true. But truth doesn't end at memory. Sometimes it begins when you stop editing the story. I closed the album and returned to bed. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow there would be consequences. But tonight I slept. Not lightly, not cautiously, but deeply, for the first time in a long time. Rosalie arrived on Wednesday afternoon 2 days earlier than planned. I saw her car pull in through the upstairs window, her little green hatchback still dented on the driver's side, the same one she'd driven since grad school. She hadn't changed it even after her husband got promoted. That was Rosalie. In a nutshell, sensible, steady, and forever putting everyone else first. She stepped out slowly, clutching a bouquet of tulips and a reusable grocery bag. She looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from travel. The kind that sits in the soul. I was already at the door when she rang the bell. "Mom," she said, her voice catching. "Hi." I opened my arms and she leaned into them. The hug was longer than it used to be. Warmer, sadder. She smelled like cinnamon and cold air. "I came as soon as I could," she murmured. I nodded. "You're here, that's enough." We sat in the kitchen where Lena had left a fresh pot of chamomile tea. Rosalie pulled out small containers of homemade soup and a loaf of banana bread from her bag. "I didn't know what you'd be in the mood for," she said, trying to smile. "So I made everything." She poured our tea and sat down, wringing her hands. She'd always done that when she was nervous, even as a little girl. I watched her for a moment and then I said it. "I got your message. The one you sent when you found out about the surgery." She looked down. "I know. I should have come sooner." "I understand," I said. "Oliver had exams." Her mouth twisted and she blinked quickly. "That wasn't the real reason." I said nothing, just waited. "I was scared," she admitted. "Not just about your health, but about everything I'd buried for years. I kept telling myself you were strong, that you didn't need me, that you preferred Graham." I didn't flinch. She wasn't wrong. I think I convinced myself, she continued, that I was the spare. The one who didn't need the attention, because he always got it. "You were never the spare," I said gently. She looked up, her eyes wet. "Then why did it feel that way?" I didn't have an answer, not one that would undo the years. But I could give her the truth. "Because I thought he needed more," I said. "And I was afraid if I didn't give it to him, he'd fall apart." "So you let me be strong," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I leaned on you when I should have stood taller." She took a deep breath. "When Lena called, she said you weren't doing well, but that something had changed in you, that you were fiercer." I chuckled softly. "I suppose she's right. Something did change." She reached for my hand. Are you angry at me? No, I said. I'm grateful you're here now. That's what matters. We drank our tea slowly. Outside, snow had begun to fall, a light dusting the kind that makes everything quiet. Eventually, she asked, "Do you want to tell me what Graham did?" I hesitated. Then I showed her the message. She read it, eyes widening. Her lips parted in disbelief. "He wanted to fake a doctor's note," she said. "To steal your money." I nodded. "I knew he was selfish," she said, voice shaking, "but I never imagined he'd try to hurt you like this." "He didn't think of it as hurting me," I replied. "He thought of it as protecting his inheritance." She was quiet for a long moment. Then quietly, Are you changing the will?" "I already have," I said. "Most of the estate is now in a trust, based on behavior, not bloodline. Every year, I'll decide how the income is distributed. After I pass, the trustees will follow those same principles." She didn't react right away. Then she whispered, "That's brilliant." "It's fair," I said, "and it gives Graham a chance to change, if he wants to." "Will he?" she asked. "I don't know." She looked at me softer now. "What about me?" I smiled. "You've already started coming back." We sat in the stillness together. Later, she helped me into the living room. We sat by the fireplace watching the embers settle into glowing red. I showed her Roland's letter. She read it in silence, holding it like a sacred thing. "I wish I'd known he felt this way," she said. "He loved both of you," I replied, "but he saw what I couldn't." "I wish I had said something sooner," she whispered. "About how I felt, about everything." "So do I said, "but we're saying it now." A beat passed. Then she said something I hadn't heard in years. "Can I stay the night?" I turned to her. "Of course you can." That night she stayed in the guest room. I laid in bed listening to the creaks of the house, the hush of snowfall outside, and the distant comforting sound of my daughter moving about. The clock still read 3:12, but in this house something was finally beginning to move. The snow had barely melted when I made the calls. Rosalie had already agreed. Lena too. Theodore naturally would attend. Layla was hesitant at first, but I told her plainly, "If you don't come, I won't have anyone there I truly trust." And then finally I called Graham. He answered on the third ring, his voice clipped. "Yes, I'm having a family gathering this Sunday at 2:00, I said. "Everyone will be here. I'd like you and Odette and Pearl to come." There was a pause. Then with suspicion laced behind the politeness, "What's this about? I think it's time we all talk face to face." He didn't answer right away. "Then fine, we'll be there." And he hung up. Sunday came bright and sharp. The house glowed in the winter light, warmed by a low fire in the hearth, and the smell of cinnamon from Lena's bread pudding. I wore the emerald dress Roland had once bought me for our anniversary. Pearl earrings, lipstick the color of old roses. If I was going to confront my family, I would do it with my back straight and my chin high. By 2:10, everyone had arrived. The living room was full in a way it hadn't been in years. Rosalie sat beside her teenage sons who looked nervous but curious. Lena lingered by the sideboard pouring coffee. Layla stood near the bookshelf, her hands folded politely in front of her. Theodore sat to my right with his briefcase at his feet, calm as a monk, and across from me, Graham, Odette, and Pearl. Graham looked like he'd rehearsed every possible scenario except this one. Odette's face was a smooth mask, flawless and unreadable. Sweet Pearl looked uncomfortable, as if she could feel the tension in the air like a wire stretched too tight. I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, but I've spent the last few weeks thinking about what I want my legacy to be, not just in terms of money, but in terms of who I am and what I believe." Odette shifted. Graham crossed his legs, feigning ease. I continued. "As you know, I had a heart attack, a serious one. It forced me to face truths I've avoided for far too long. About myself, about all of you." Silence. "I've changed my will," I said simply. "It is now a living trust, and the assets of this family will no longer be distributed by default." Graham's jaw clenched. "The trust," I explained, "is based on annual evaluations, behavior, presence, intention, not bloodline. Those who show care, real care, will benefit. Those who don't, will not." The room buzzed. Graham sat up straighter. "You can't be serious." Theodore calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. "It's all legal," he said, sliding copies across the table. "Clarisse retains full control during her life." Upon her passing, the trustees will administer according to her sealed guidelines. Odette's voice was sharp. So we have to compete now, like we're on some kind of inheritance reality show. No, I said softly, you have to care, that's all. Rosalie looked down, biting her lip. Graham scoffed. This is outrageous. You're pitting us against each other. No, I repeated firmer now, I'm holding you accountable. I looked directly at him. You see, I received a message from you. One you didn't mean for me to read, about forging documents, about faking illness, about removing me. Graham paled. Odette shot him a look of pure fury. Pearl gasped softly. Dad, is that true? He didn't answer. Theodore cleared his throat. The message has been documented. If legal action is taken against the trust, we're prepared to respond with full evidence. There was nowhere for him to hide. I turned to Rosalie. To you I leave the antique books you've always loved and the study which will be yours to use any time. To your children, each of them will receive $250,000 in a protected trust when they turn 25. She blinked rapidly, mouthing thank you. I looked at Pearl. You too, dear. You'll have your own portion. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Grandma. I don't need the money, but thank you. I turned to Layla. To Layla, I've already transferred a gift of $500,000. Gasps rippled. She saved my life not just physically, but spiritually. She reminded me that love is not measured by what someone says, but by how they show up when no one is watching. Layla's lips parted. Clarisse, it's already done, I said, no arguing. Graham stood. So this is how it ends. You humiliate your own son in front of strangers. I stood too. No, Graham. This is how it begins. You now have a choice. You can rebuild trust, earn your place, or you can walk out now and live with the consequences. He looked around the room. No one stood with him, not even Odette. Then in silence he turned and walked out. Odette followed her heels, clicking like gunshots. Pearl hesitated, then turned to me. I'll visit again soon, I promise. She hugged me tightly before following them. The room was quiet. Rosalie reached over and took my hand. Mom, she said, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I smiled. I'm just finally tired of waiting to matter. Layla leaned in and whispered, You do matter, and you're not done yet. The clock still read 3:12, but I had never felt more in motion. The house was quiet again, but not the kind of silence that weighs down on you like a wool blanket soaked in sorrow. This silence was gentle, peaceful, the kind that follows truth when it's finally spoken aloud. Rosalie stayed one more night. We had soup and bread in the kitchen, laughing over memories we hadn't shared in years, like how Graham used to pretend to faint to get out of chores, or how Roland once accidentally glued two of my favorite books together, trying to repair a torn spine. It felt like breathing after holding it in for too long. The next morning, she left early to return to her family. But not before she hugged me tightly and whispered, You didn't lose a son today, Mom. You found your self-respect. After she left, I walked through the house, slowly touching each wall like it might disappear. It was still old, still creaky, still far too big for one woman, but it no longer felt empty. At noon, Lena arrived with Layla. They brought sandwiches, fresh fruit, and oddly a set of miniature tools wrapped in a dish towel. We're fixing the clock, Layla said like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at them. You're not clockmakers. No, she said with a smile. But we watched a video. Lena snorted. Don't worry, if we break it, it's already broken. I watched from my chair by the window as they worked, kneeling in front of it like surgeons at a sacred altar. Tiny movements, quiet mutters, Lena handing tools, while Layla adjusted the brass pendulum. And then, a click, a whir, a slow, deliberate tock. Tick, tock. I gasped. The pendulum swung. The hands moved. And the chimes, dusty and forgotten, sang out a single clear note. 3:13, 1 minute forward, just one. But it felt like time had returned to me. Layla turned, grinning like a child. It lives. I clapped my hands together, the sound echoing softly against the window glass. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that sound again. It's like you, she said. It just needed a little realignment. Later that afternoon, Theodore returned with an envelope. There, he said, placing it in my hands. Filed, signed, protected. Thank you, I said. You've done more for me than I could ever repay. He shook his head. You've repaid it, Clarisse. You remembered who you are. He left shortly after, but before he did, he paused by the doorway. And if you ever want a third trustee, you know where to find me. I laughed. Tempting, but I think Layla might be ahead of you. Good, he smiled. She deserves it. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, a blanket across my knees, the faint ticking of the clock, now a constant behind me. At 6:05, my phone vibrated. A text. From Graham. I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll believe I can be better. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I whispered, then show me. I closed my eyes and listened. To the fire crackling, to the wind brushing against the windows, to the steady sure tick of a clock that had once stood still. Layla arrived later with a small birthday card. No occasion, just something she found that reminded her of me. On the front was a quote, "Time doesn't heal, but it reveals, and in the revealing we become whole." I pinned it to the corkboard in the kitchen. The next morning, I wrote letters to each of my grandchildren. Not about money, about love, about legacy, about learning to see people for who they are not, who you hope they'll be. And I ended each letter with the same line. My love isn't in the will, it's in your choices. I'll be watching, I believe in you. The next Sunday, I sat by the window with a fresh pot of tea. The clock struck 2. I smiled, because this time I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was watching, alive, awake, and finally free.